Welcome, everyone, to Asians Represent. My name is Drew. I will be your host for today. And today we are talking a little bit about Asian genealogy and family histories. Today I am joined by Sean Lee, a very valued member of our community and one of our moderators for our Discord community. Uh, Sean, if you want to say a little bit about yourself, people may not be familiar with what your whole steez is.
Hi, I'm Sean. As Drew said, I'm one of the moderators. I'm from New York City, and many of you in the Discord community might know me from all the cute pictures of my daughter that I share.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely. It is like cute pictures of your daughter are like synonymous with you, you know it's like
it's a,
where you are, a photo of your baby is not too far behind.
well, I did join pretty soon. Well, not pretty soon. I joined just before she was born. So that was, I wanted to share my journey as a parent to anyone who might want or need advice or just like cute pictures of babies.
Yeah, and I think part of that journey too is, I mean, you are creating family history. I mean, we all are, right? We are all in the process of creating history, family or otherwise. But what you're doing is you're creating memories and sharing those memories, and those that shared memory is part of what we're kind of here to talk about today, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
And yeah, a lot of it I think comes from just growing up in an era where photography, everyday photography for people wasn't really a thing because it was still film and digital was just an emerging technology at the time. And when you have parents who are from a different country where the tech they have there is decades behind what was even in America at the time, then photos of childhood are pretty rare. I mean, we have a lot of it, but up until a certain point, then it just kind of stops.
Sure. No, I totally understand. Um, Well, I suppose let's get into it. So, if you want, here, I can go first with some of my family history. So, what we wanted to do today is we wanted to talk a little bit about family histories, specifically within an Asian, or in this case, even more specifically in a Chinese context. You and I are both Chinese, and we wanted to do an episode where we talked about our family histories, kind of our journeys in discovering what we have, and what we don't have, as well as kind of best practices when it comes to doing genealogy. For those who don't know, so I actually work as a genealogist. It is my day job. And I work for the local library here in my city, and that is what I do for my 9 to 5. So I, at this point, know quite a bit about it. And though, good Lord, genealogy is one of those holes that grows ever deeper as you continue onwards, because it is sometimes an infinite abyss of how much work and how much reward can come out of it. But what are some of your experiences in doing family history? How did you get started? How did you get interested in even kind of learning about your family?
It mostly just comes from stories that my grandparents told me when they were still alive, just some of the experiences they had, what life was like in China. My family's from the Guangzhou region.
Yep.
Uh, Primary language at home was Taishanese. Um, and it was I, as a storyteller myself, it was really important to me to kind of keep track of all these stories that my grandparents told me. But now I'm just kind of working off of what I remember as a child, and that uh, so much of it is just lost through time. And then there's the language barriers that I have communicating with my parents as well, because they don't speak very much English at all and I don't speak very much Chinese. So there's always this struggle to find the correct vocabulary, to find the right questions, to understand what their experiences were like, uh, from an emotional context as well, which they are not very keen to share. Very much telling
Sure.
these stories with this, we don't like to talk about the past. That's in the past. Everything like the cultural, like we sweep everything old and bad away every new year, and then we welcome in the new prosperity and the future. We bring that in, and uh, I don't know. It's an uphill battle to try to collate these stories. And I have a large family, so uh, trying to communicate with multiple people, uh, especially now with what happened with the pandemic and this urge to try to get back together, but still having that anxiety of
Sure.
reconnecting it's a difficult thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So we actually so like so many, I mean, Taishan is literally called the home of the overseas Chinese for a reason. The Guangzhou region, and Taishan in particular, is home to a huge chunk of Chinese Americans, including like my family came from Taishan. I know many of you in the audience will be obviously familiar with Daniel, who is typically the host, and his family comes from Taishan as well. And so how I got started with it was, so for me, it came from a total separation from the source material, which is to say, my, uh, I grew up with my, I didn't have a grandfather. He had passed away before I was born. And my grandma, because I'm half Chinese, so we're talking about the Chinese half of my family. Um, my grandma lived in, she has passed away since, but she lived in New York, and did not really speak English similarly. And my dad had to translate for us for most conversations, what few conversations we really had. And my dad, in turn, was also not super keen to talk about, at least from my perspective, he wasn't super keen to talk about a lot of his family history. It just never came up. And so I became interested in our, my heritage, and the things that I felt were being kind of like kept from me, right? And so I do not have a large family. I have a very, very small family. And so, um, there's not too many people to talk to either. And there's not too many people that I can really get in contact with that might have more. So, and I really owe a lot of what I do have in terms of my family history to my mom. My mom, who is white, married my dad, had my sister and I, and she was very adamant that we learn about our Chinese heritage. She was very adamant that we learn about our the culture that we came from, that history. She tried with the language, but she didn't speak it either. And my dad didn't really speak Cantonese or Mandarin. He really specifically spoke Taishanese. Like, he could kind of get by in Cantonese, but that's what he grew up with, is Taishanese. So that's kind of what he knew. And even still, he when we were young, he wasn't really into the idea of us speaking it, because I don't really know if he really wanted to. I'm putting words in his mouth, but I don't know if he really wanted to learn or like have to speak it either. You know, but my mom was determined, so she interviewed my grandma, my dad's mom, and my dad had to do a lot of translating for her, and she did her best. And she compiled this sort of brief history of the family, and made a scrapbook out of it, that we have today, which is a great tool for my work, because my work, obviously, as a genealogist, I don't have a grandma at this point in my life to interview now. So I have this sort of collection that I can use that my mom had. And so that's really important for me to have because otherwise I'm using databases and vital records and things like that to try to put together the rest of it.
Hmm. How would you rate your fluency with like Taishanese?
Oh, none, none,
None. Okay, I
none.
can probably talk to your dad.
Hell yeah. Hell
Yeah.
yeah. I'll go get them.
No, my grandma raised us when my parents were working, so uh, everyone that I've spoken to, like as a near 40-year-old man, going back to Chinatown and talking to shop owners and everything, they are surprised that someone my age would speak Taishanese as well as I do, because I like
Sure.
have. I think they like to say it's the perfect accent or something. My pronunciations are like on point.
Nice. Yeah, we tried with Cantonese, and as a at the time, like 7, 8 year old, I wasn't that into learning a language, and without that like parental need, because like my dad had to speak it because that's all his parents really knew, and so he had to speak the language, and so that means that he learned it. He had to use it every day whenever he was home from school or work or whatever. Whereas for me, I mean, my dad speaks perfect English. He's fine. Like, I don't have to speak it, and so without having to speak it, that practice really just never went anywhere, right? So yeah, I don't really speak, and I certainly do not read it at all, even
Same here.
slightly.
Same here. Yeah.
Yeah,
I always also grew up with this mentality that Taishanese is kind of, and I don't really believe this now, like a useless dialect in terms of getting work, in terms of having it, like in terms of passing it down culturally to my daughter, because just the experience of seeing it in media and like Hong Kong movies. Whenever Taishanese comes up, it's usually done as like a joke. It's like, oh, look at this country bumpkin kind
sure.
of role that you see and hear. And it really is kind of like this really unique sound that I very much appreciate way more now. And
Yeah, I think it's um the median age for people who work in genealogy, not work in genealogy, but rather pursue genealogy, like doing their own family histories and things like that. The median age is quite high, and I think there's something about getting older, and as we get older, we appreciate more and more that family history because we realize, I think, our part in it, and the part we play and the perspective we then have as older people. And like, to be fair, I'm only 28. Part of my verve in doing genealogy is because I work in it. I have to enjoy it, which I do, thankfully. But you know, there's something to be said about age putting it into perspective, and thus we get more and more interested, or the things that we shunned when we were younger we suddenly start to accept sometimes because we realize that it is an integral part of who we are, and that's worth passing down, that's worth disseminating, that's worth talking about.
yeah, it's always just this fear that it's too late, that we missed we missed the boat on that. That it's too late to go back and kind of improve upon this deficit in language that we have now, because we didn't practice it, because the pressure to westernize just kind of caused us to just push it down and just keep it as a separate part that only comes out when you're around family, or the whole code switching thing is immense.
Yeah, absolutely. um
I do
so
have a question
oh, go ahead, go ahead, go
though.
ahead.
When you're going through the genealogy rabbit hole, like what do you find is like the most common dead end that you hit? Because with my family, because there was so much poverty in the region that they grew up in, Education was, bare minimum, and apparently the we had like one person in the village who kept track of everyone's family histories in a literal physical book that got passed down to his son, who doesn't do that anymore because he doesn't live in that village anymore. Um, I feel like if I try to look up somebody, that's where it would end. Like, just there wouldn't be much information for me to find. But that being said, I also had a lot of uncles who were in the Chinese military. One who got pretty high ranking at some point, so maybe there might be something there that can be traced.
Sure. So, for my own journey, so I'll kind of use my own journey, uh, and kind of talk about that a little bit as an answer. So my grandfather. He was born in 1924 and he came over in 1940. So we're looking at the tail end of the Chinese Exclusion Act. We are looking at the, what would be the opening of World War II, not too much later. And, you know, he came over. And I'm not entirely sure what he did. I think he was a grocer for a while in Chinatown in Manhattan, uh, and eventually he would move out to Flushing. He and the family, but then we get to his own dad. Uh, so my great grandfather, Bat Kwong, and uh, for a long time, I thought he was the dead end. I thought he was the ghost in the family, the one that would be elusive. But I did manage to find records for him. I managed to find like things like a voter registration, proof that he actually voted and that he was a citizen. I managed to find evidence of his citizenship. I managed to find things like that. But they were the first, and those two dudes were the first in the family to come over. And before them, that's the dead end. At least for me and my family, the dead end is when we're back in China, which is really hard because that's some of the stuff that I want to know the most about is you know there are people who they can trace their family lineage like in European terms back to the 1700s. There are people who can trace their lineage back to things like the Mayflower, and they can trace their lineage back to European this and that, or even in like Chinese genealogy, they can trace their lineage because they found the right book, the right clan book. They managed to trace their genealogy pretty easily back for 500-600 years, and yet I can't really get past my own great grandfather.
Right.
Right?
That's about where I'm at too.
Yeah.
There's just no records, no written records, no, at this point, not really much oral history either. It's just like, oh yeah, that's your great grandfather.
Yeah, yeah. For almost even in the scrapbook that my mom has, we have photos of relatives that go beyond my great grandfather, or we have photos of like great uncles and great aunts and whatnot. But there are people with names and faces, but no stories because I just don't know anything about them, and a lot of them stayed in China, and so because of that, I can't really get a bead on where they might be, where their descendants might be, what were their stories, and that comes into the nitty gritty partially of the nature of why records exist, who gets to access them, and how they're able to be used. So, for instance, though China has arguably the oldest and richest tradition of genealogy, partially due to family veneration and ancestral veneration. Um, it's not a easily accessible thing. They're hardly digitized, so they're basically, most of them are not online. There are no like, so for every 10 years, the US does a census, and that census data is down to the wire of like your, names, can you read and write, where you lived, like the street you lived on, who your neighbors were, what was your occupation, who else is living in the house, how old are you, and we have those records up until 1950. So we have everything from like 1880s, we have 1890s, we have 1910s, 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. The only reason we don't have more recent ones is because of privacy laws. We can't, I believe it's about 70 years is when they can be published. So, when we hit 2030, for instance, we'll then release the 1960
Right,
census
right.
for public consumption. In China, China started doing their censuses in 1953.
Oh,
Uh,
okay.
so it's much more recent. And while you can go online and look at that census information, they do not publish vital records. So vital records are birth, marriage, and death. They do not publish that kind of stuff. You cannot know about it. As far as I am understanding, there are fairly strict laws surrounding it in terms of privacy, and they just, for whatever reason, and I know that there are Western scholars that think very skeptically of the Chinese government and why this may be the case. But there are just no real records that you can find online,
Right.
right?
Can you access your own records? If I ask my parents, hey, can you look up these things for me? Assuming they agree to it, would they be able to access them, or is it like just private from everyone, including yourself?
My understanding is that it's private from everyone.
Okay.
There is no real way to get to it to begin with. And from a Chinese American perspective, it's also difficult because it's all going to be in Chinese. It's all
Yeah.
going to be, and so that also includes having to read and write it. And that is a very, very difficult thing to do. It is a monster of a task learning a lot of that. And
Hmm.
so, and that's some pretty complex information that they're trying to disseminate. And so, even if you got your hands on it, it would be difficult. In that case, I would probably recommend um, looking for like a translator, which is, not something that everyone can do. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I just have a feeling a lot of my family records are literally on some stone tablet somewhere up in the mountains in China, in Taishan, because
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
a whole bunch of graves and stuff up there. I remember I went back to China when I was back to China. I went to China for the first time when I was around 4 years old, and I think one of the first things we did was take a very unsafe truck on a very unsafe road up the mountains to do some like I think it was like a Qingming thing
Yeah.
there. Yeah, I remember the pig. It was alive and then it was cooked.
Sure.
Yeah, very very boondocksy.
Yeah. Um, and so this kind of gets us into um the sort of source or the prime evidence that we can find for being in China, like Chinese genealogy, not Chinese American, but Chinese genealogy, is something called a clan book. So it's interchangeable roughly, but it's either called a zupu, as the sort of pinyin would be, or English would be ZUPU, and then or a Japu, which would be JIAPU. And these are books that have been passed down from generation to generation within families and clans, in various villages and towns and cities that contain it is not just genealogical records, it's historical context, because there are like historical poems that describe family members and deeds and famous events that surrounded the family. It contains the patrilineal information. So patrilineal meaning it is male dominated, it is male based. So it is all about the sons of sons of sons of sons. Unfortunately, it's only a more recent practice, and it's not universal that women are mentioned. Otherwise, women are often pretty rare in Zupus, to the point where sometimes in Zupus it'll mention like your wife's dad in it,
Oh,
but not your wife.
oh,
You
okay.
know, I married the daughter of Chang, right?
Yeah.
And it
It's
won't
funny.
mention who the
Yeah.
daughter is.
Yeah, it's funny you should mention like the poetry part because my dad had mentioned to me before that when children are born, more sons are born, they were given their name, but then there's another name that you get like later on in life that is a more poetic one that gets inserted into a like a family poem that just kind of keeps track of. It's supposed to be a continuation of a poem that's ever being written. That is like your family history. And I don't remember what mine is, but he told it to me once, and I don't remember it.
So in I would say very traditional Chinese culture, there are like three names. There's your birth name. There is what is it called? I think it's called your social name. So like when you are an adult or get married, when you kind of reach that age, you might often receive a second name, and then you have a literary name.
That sounds
Yeah,
like what he was talking about.
yeah,
Um, and oh, that speaking of names, that's a thing that culturally speaking is kind of a difficult point to get through too, because you grow up, you don't call anybody by their actual names. You don't call them Uncle Steve in Chinese culture. You call them by whatever their relationship is to you. Oh, that's my fifth uncle, and in that context, you know that it's the uncle from either your mom's side or your dad's side, and what their birth order is, and yeah, I don't know most of my aunts and uncles' names, and I have so many of them. I know some of their names. I know some of their names. Clarifying there. But for the most part, I just know them as like whatever number uncle or aunt that they are related to me by.
yeah, for sure. And this, between that and the name changes that a person might go through, this can make genealogy a bit difficult from a modern perspective. Um, and, in the same vein that in that scrapbook that I mentioned that my mom created with all the interviews and research that she did with my, trying to get information and family history out of my grandma. Um, some of my like great aunts or great uncles and whatnot have their names attached to them. If my grandma knew them, like knew their names, but some of them are just, brother number two,
Yeah.
brother number three, you
Hmm.
know, and that's it. That's all we get.
Yeah, and even more confusing, sometimes the number is not correlated to the order in which they were born, but by gender. So my second aunt on my mom's side might not be the second oldest aunt, just the second aunt that was born with however many uncles in between.
Sure.
My nephews refer to me as second uncle, not because there's another uncle before me, but because I'm the younger brother. So my brother is first, and I'm the second one. So I'm second uncle. It's weird.
Yeah. Yeah, I so because of the very small nature of my family, that is, that is a part of Chinese culture that I wasn't exposed to. It's just my dad, and then I have two aunts, but it's all very Americanized, you know. So they are Aunt Florence and they are Aunt Genevieve, right? They are not Aunt number one and two for me, you know, because it's just all very Americanized. So I was thinking we could maybe go into, so now that we've talked a little bit about our family histories and kind of where we've kind of gone with a little bit of it. I was thinking maybe we could jump into um, I was going to say some of our audience questions until later. However, some of them wrap into what we're going to talk about anyways. So I think I'll just weave them in as they come around. Um, but one of them was asked, how do you trace spelling changes in names, e.g., or example given, Sear, Cyr to Sears, Sears. These are all questions that came from our Discord community because I put the call out for it. A hot tip: if you want to join in on that kind of stuff, you can find our Discord. Uh, yeah, you should join. Anyways, so how do you trace spelling changes in names? Well, so I kind of have an interesting story with that. So uh, my last name is Quan. We would spell it Quon. It's really more realistically Guan with a G sound to it, but Quan nonetheless. That is the name that I have, the last name that I have. That is the last name that my dad has. That's the last name that my grandpa has. That is not the last name that his dad has. His last name is Kwong with a G on the end. Why? I don't know. That's a lie. I do know. But um so this gets into, and I should real quick just put up a bit of a content warning. We're talking about the era of the Chinese Exclusion Act. So this is a time of very rough immigration practices. So just, you know, we're not going to get too hot and heavy into it. We're not going to talk about really any violence or anything like that. But just know that we're kind of talking about, uh, a time when immigration was very fraught for Chinese people and Asian people in general. But so when my great grandfather, Bat Kwong, immigrated, he was probably a paper son, maybe. So a paper son is someone who, because of the uh, nature of the Chinese Exclusion Act. So the Chinese Exclusion Act made it so that Chinese laborers cannot enter the country. You could only enter the country if you were like a merchant or like a student or a diplomat. And even then, it was still very difficult because the laws were very vague in terms of who constitutes a laborer, to the point where at like Angel Island in San Francisco, at the which Angel Island was the immigration office on an island separated from the rest of San Francisco out in the bay. They would even check your hands for calluses, because if you had any calluses, you must be a laborer. Therefore, you cannot enter the country. And like, you know, most Chinese people back then were laborers. You know, they were used to laboring in fields or doing tough work. As a necessity for getting by. So I mean, most people have a callus or two, so it's a kind of a ridiculous requirement. But anyways, paper sons and daughters, paper families were people who, on paper, related to each other as a way to enter the country, but in reality were not related to each other, or in some way they fraudulently entered the country. So, when I went on this journey, and we'll swing to the name change in a second, but when I was researching him, according to family history, according to what my grandma said, he first immigrated to Canada and then immigrated down into the U.S. before going to New York City specifically. I cannot find a single trace of this man in a time when it was very stringent which Chinese men and women could enter the country or not. When you cannot find an example of this guy, when everyone's written down because it's against the law, um, it is most likely that he immigrated illegally, right?
Hmm.
So he entered the country, and this was very common during this time, was for people in places like the Guangzhou province to go to Hong Kong, take a boat from there to Victoria, Canada, and then either walk or take a boat down into Washington and then get into the country from there.
Oh boy.
Yeah, this was very common for the time frame, and this is most likely what he did. This is now I cannot say this for certain, but this is most likely what he did. But that being said, uh, something significant, very significant, happens in 1906. I believe it's 1906. The Great San Francisco earthquake happens, right, and it devastates San Francisco. And part of which got devastated in the fires subsequently was the immigration records. The immigration
Oh,
offices
okay.
were destroyed. And so all of a sudden, you have all these Chinese people in the country and many others, but you had all these Chinese workers in the country who have you can't prove that they weren't already here as
Right, right,
citizens.
right.
So because of that, they all went in mass to the offices and said, well, we've already been here and we were born here. You can't prove that we were not born here. Therefore, we are birthright citizens. And so what we see on his papers is that he was, according to the papers, he was born in 1905, San Francisco, which is a bald-faced lie. Like,
Yeah.
um it is flat out not the truth. It just completely contradicts family history, and I have no reason to doubt family history in this case. Sometimes we have to be wary of oral histories,
Hmm.
not because people are lying, but because people misremember
Right.
and things like that. And in this case, this is someone talking about, this is my grandma talking about her father-in-law. I don't think, that we are so far removed that she would get that wrong. Anyways, so his last name is Kwong. Phoneticized, it's Quong. So how then do we get from Kwong to Quan, my last name? Well, Bat Kwong has children. He left his family to come to the US to work and send money back to his family. And he left behind a wife and children. He would not see his wife for another 35 years before she was finally able to immigrate after the Exclusion Act ended in 1943 during the war. And yet his own son, Xiao Fu Quan, wanted to immigrate, and so he came over. What we think happened, according to family history, and this is where I think it's a little not suspicious. Again, not lying. I think misremembering or not fully understanding the details. Um, but according to my grandma, uh, her husband had to immigrate and change his last name because he shared a last name with someone else, and that wasn't allowed. That doesn't seem quite right. I can't find an example of a law like that where that would be the case, and I can't find an instance of another Xiao Fuke anyone. And so, what I think happened is, in order to distance himself from his own father, he had to change his name, which is a big deal. I mean, you are changing your identity, you are changing your perception or the world's perception of who you are. in order to fit in a new country. Right, he entered through San Francisco. He was on the SS Cleveland, I believe. I found all those kinds of documents, his immigration documents and whatnot, and he had to claim that he wasn't his own dad's son.
Right.
And even though they would eventually live together, they would always on paper never be related,
Yeah.
technically, from a legal standpoint. But how do we then trace that? Well, so part of that's family histories. So knowing things like that. Part of it is uh, finding, if you are trying to do this in a different way, if you are looking up like census data and everything else fits but the names don't. So if you are in the case of the question from CYR to SEAR, if you're going from seer to seer in different spellings, um, census takers, immigration officers, um, government officials, they all get names wrong constantly, especially back in the day. And so, uh, but the first names will usually be right. And usually whoever they're with will also be correct. So if you're finding Shao and Bat and Lu and Shang all in the same grouping in this census, and then you're finding them all in a group in a different decade census, but the last name's different, it's most likely that's the same people, but either the names changed, somehow the spelling's different, but that would be look to other factors, look to other things that connect them, that are more than just their last name. That would be my official recommendation for tracing spelling changes, and it's difficult. It can be very difficult.
Yeah.
Um,
In my family, there are several people who, when they immigrated here, a westernized spelling was kind of just pushed onto their paperwork for them. Uh,
sure.
yeah, and that is, uh, I don't know. I feel like that's kind of feels like a violation almost, because it just because the person who was doing your paperwork at the time couldn't pronounce something or didn't know how something was spelled, they're just like, yeah, this is close enough. There
Yeah,
you go.
like your name's uh, you know, I don't know. It's Zhao. And because I can't pronounce it, you're now John.
Yeah, yeah. I have
Yeah,
an
that happened a
uncle.
lot.
I had an uncle whose name got translated to Furman, Ferman,
Now
and
that's not a name.
it's, I don't know. It sounds name enough.
it,
Uh,
it is a name in that he has it, therefore it is a name.
yeah,
But how you go from whatever his original name was to the name that's pushed on him, uh, why it's Furman over something else is kind of wild to me.
yeah. My sister in law's father, his name got translated to Louis. Just,
Yeah,
huh. Yeah, and then there's time periods too, like when pinyin got became like the official spelling of Chinese names. So my grandfather's name is spelled Lee, but my family's name, like my immediate family, were like the last ones in my immediate family to immigrate to America in 1984, around there. Our names are spelled Li. So
yeah,
yeah, and that's
yeah.
yeah, and then the
And
dialects too, because in Cantonese, Li is Lei, and Taishanese is Lei, very similar, but in Mandarin it's Li. So that Li, you would think it would be spelled Lei or something, but that's a different Chinese last name that my sister-in-law has. So it's difficult to look at just the Romanized spellings of things and try to find what that actual name is if you don't know what the like how to write it out in Chinese.
yeah, I my biggest recommendation, at least in the context of Chinese genealogy, is clutch your family name, like the Chinese character for it, close to your chest,
Yeah,
because that will not steer you wrong. You know,
yeah, I know how to
uh,
write it.
yeah. I don't remember. I don't know if I could write mine under pressure, but I can spot it from a mile away on a list. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Lee is
Um,
easy. You got tree up top and then sun on the bottoms.
yeah. For Guan, there's a lot of lines and dashes. There's lots of things going on with that one.
So
Um,
it was like pushed on me as a kid. Like just now, I was instinctively writing it out in the air with my
yeah.
hand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, Another one is how much info can one get if your family/parents were immigrants? Um, One that depends on where your family or parents are from. Um, so, unfortunately, well, fortunately for some people, unfortunately for others, um, the West, has uh, the best modern genealogical records. So we're talking Western Europe, parts of Eastern Europe, America, the U.S., like Canada as well. Mexico also has really good genealogical records, depending on what you're looking for. But it just depends on, and this is unfortunately true for so much of genealogy, that it just depends. If we're talking about Chinese immigration, you might be able to find like paperwork of where your like what ship they came on. You might be able to find some of that, but and this is true for everyone, regardless of immigration. Recency is the enemy, which is to say, if it's recent, then there's no record of it. There is somewhere in some database that you don't have access to. It's locked away behind privacy laws, and it's not considered historically relevant yet. So it's not in somewhere like the National Archives, which is publicly accessible. So it's kind of it's in that foreground of it's too recent to matter historically, which is not true, but that's just kind of how it is. I think history starts, the moment you leave it, you know. So everything up till today is history, but that's just not how it's necessarily viewed for the sake of genealogy. Um, Hope that kind of answers the question.
Yeah.
If it doesn't, um, you can always
And
just Discord DM me. Yeah,
it's also dependent on like your relationship to your parents and their relationship to their past and whether or not they're willing
true.
to open up about that kind of thing. Then there's language barriers. If you don't speak, your family's native language very well, as many of us Chinese Americans feel, then that could be just difficulty in communication. But we have translation programs now that are like decent-ish.
Yeah, there are translation programs out there that can really help you with like live subtitles and things like that. That are, yeah, as Sean said, decent-ish, but are thankfully they are getting better every day. Those models are constantly evolving, and so that is always something to look into. I would say, in the case of recent immigration, you know, doing family history is not for everyone. We even had some chatter in our Discord about not wanting to do family history, whether it be because of, traumatic memories in the family or hard times that they went through, and that, or just it being too much, and that's totally fair. You know, Back then is not as important as your present and your future and your peace of mind. So if it disrupts that, it's totally okay to not engage in family history. That being said, oral histories, interviews, that is your best bet for having that family history. When we have brand new people come into our library and ask about, well, how do I start with genealogy? How do I start with my family history? We always recommend start with yourself. Record your thoughts. record your life, and then record uh, those in your life, especially your older ones, your elders, because unfortunately, when they pass away, so much context and history goes with them. Uh, so many stories untold, so many moments unheard, and so you want to be able to record them and be able to pass those on, and do that kind of that kind of a thing, and that will, just like my mom with her mother-in-law, that will open the door hopefully for, maybe it's you, maybe it's someone else in your family, uh, being able to go and really get into the genealogy of things as records open up. You are doing it not just for yourself, but for the people that come after you.
Yeah, that's definitely something I've been trying to do personally too. Like I got a new webcam. I wanted to do a lot of recordings, just detailing my journey as a father for my daughter, for when she's older and she can watch it and understand the context of, what she was like now, what we're going through in this period in history. Um, just there's just so little that I feel like I have access to that I want to start something for myself and my family.
Yeah, between a my father, who is a videographer and a photographer, and has been for my entire life, and also helping to be in 3 podcasts. My life is sometimes too documented, but I'm very thankful, and I wasn't always. This is something that age has also kind of mellowed me out on. Is I used to be very annoyed with my dad doing like photography always, and videos, and always having to feel like I had to pose for things, and act in front of the camera. But I also, as I get older, and especially as I do genealogy, and I think about what I'm also passing on, um, you know, that means that there's a wealth of family history that my dad has recorded of myself, my sisters, my mom, my extended family, him himself. Um, yeah, and oral histories or interviews don't have to be a very scary thing. There are guides online with best practices and tips, and it could be as simple as just asking, what were the holidays like? What kind of things did you celebrate? What was a particularly cheerful time when you were a kid? Just that kind of stuff. It doesn't always have to be dark and heavy and traumatic. Family history should be all encompassing. It should be as bright and wonderful as it can be as well. So, um, another question was, how much native/family language would we need to know to do said family research? Um, Man, it
Oof.
just depends.
Yeah.
It does. It does just depend. If you're doing Chinese American research where you are looking at immigration records for your family that immigrated to America, obviously that's going to be in English, and so that's a lot easier. You know, but the nice thing about those Zupus or Japus, as I was describing them earlier, those clan family books, um, you know, they are pretty standardized in terms of their layout. So if you know the characters you're looking for, and you memorize or have on a cheat sheet like the character for the dates and the years and things like that, you can pretty reliably get through some of it. If you can find that clan book to begin with. That's a whole other thing. I don't know if you had anything to add to language.
Yeah, well, like you said earlier, it depends on also the country and whether what their willingness to give you access to the information would be.
Yeah, I mean, so one that comes to mind is Germany. So Germany, for whatever reason, just loved recording all of their, basically kind of like a Zupu, but it's called an Ortsfamilienbuch. It just basically means a family book, where it is villages and counties, and where it lists everybody that lived there, their spouses, their children, all within a certain time frames, and those are, my library has one of the largest collections of those in the entirety of the United States, but people get very intimidated by them because they're entirely in German. But again, similar to a Zupu, they're very standardized, and you're really just looking for names. You're just looking for common names, the things that, you're not looking to maybe read every little chunk of those pages. You're scanning for things that look familiar to you, right? By and large. Oh, we got a kid.
Yeah, she's knocking on the door.
um, so,
Oh boy.
um, that sort of gets us into a little bit of, I would not say nitty gritty, but this question is, what are some good free resources for those interested in starting research? Are there any tips for reaching out to various organizations that you have? Um, Sean, did you have any thoughts immediately, or?
No, no. This like I think this is more your area of expertise. I just
That's fair.
yeah, I'm still kind of at a loss as to how to trace anything back, and it's just a matter of getting family members to open up.
Yeah, which is difficult.
Yeah, yeah,
You know, there's no understating that. It is always possible. There is always hope, but it can be difficult.
yeah. They'd rather sit down for
Um,
mahjong than sit down with me for an hour discussing what their childhood was like. And it's like, what do you want to know? We were poor and everything was bad.
sure, sure.
Yeah.
I mean, you could even try um, recording during mahjong and just see what you can gently guide them to say.
Gonna have to censor out a lot of profanity, but yes.
That's just part. Listen, the profanity is family history too. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. Why is
Uh,
everyone yelling at each other? No, that's just how they talk.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But anyways, what are some good free resources? So for those who are interested, I won't belabor it too much. But for those who are interested, in our show description, or not a show description, in our show notes, which for this episode will be free on our Patreon, Patreon at AZNS Represent. Um, we will have a list of genealogy websites, local resources, genealogical organizations, other resources, some research guides. I've put together about 3 pages worth of stuff. But essentially, I think the best resources that are free would be Family Search and Ancestry. Now, Family Search and Ancestry are Family Search is completely free. They sometimes lock images, so you can get the index data, but not the images. But that just means that you have to go to one of almost 5,000 Family Search libraries and affiliates. For instance, my library is an affiliate library, and that's just, I think, due to copyright reasons. They're not trying to get money out of you. It's just like a copyright legal agreement issue. But Family Search is completely free. You can build a family tree on there. You can access other people's family trees. Sometimes people go on there and realize that someone else has already done the dirty work, and discovered plenty of stuff. But I would recommend Family Search. Ancestry does have a free component. They do want you to pay for their services, so there's a subscription fee. I think it is worth it, but you can also go to many libraries in the US and all over the world, where you can get an Ancestry library edition. So, that's something where I would discuss with your local library, especially if they have a genealogy section. They will very likely have that library edition. But those websites are as simple as entering in first, last name, place where they might have lived, and rough birth year, and bada bing, bada boom, you're off to the races. You're able to start looking up things, right? But those are, I think, the best free resources out there to kind of check out immediately. In terms of reaching out to various organizations, I would just say that, um, it is totally okay to not know what you want. you know they are there often to help you and guide you in that process. Genealogical organizations love to have patrons. I know this because I work for one, and we love to have people come up and talk to us. And so, check out your local library, see if they have a genealogy department, or if there's one nearby. See if you have a local genealogy organization or a society. And they may not be focused on Chinese genealogy or whatever particular genealogy you're interested in, but they will certainly know the basics that can help you and put you on the right path. So, yeah, never hurts to ask questions, never hurts to reach out. I would definitely recommend doing so. You and I also recommend doing, Sean?
Yeah.
I recommend, personally, going to our good friends over at Hero Forge and making a miniature. So for those who don't know, this is the ad section of our podcast. Where Hero Forge is a browser-based application where you can go and make miniatures of all sorts and sizes. And you can, you know what? I even put it to you, make one of your ancestor, whether they be recent or older. Maybe they're imagined. You kind of imagining what they might have been like. Make a miniature of your ancestor. Post it in our Discord. Let me see that. That would be kind of fun. I did not steal this idea from Sean. I just co-opted it.
Get some old
But
family
anyways,
photograph. Find your great grandfather, make him on Hero Forge.
yep. And then post it in our Discord, discord.com/AZNS as I think how you get to it. I don't know. It's probably in the show description. Anything else that you wanted to talk about? Any avenues that you want to take us down, Sean?
Uh, I actually kind of want to know, like, what's the most interesting story you got from your, like, looking up your family history, or asking your family, your dad about, like, what it was like growing up.
Sure. So let's see. I'm trying to think. Um, so this isn't from my dad. This is something I uncovered about my um both my grandpa and my great grandpa, but I thought it was cool that they both served in World War II.
Hmm.
That they what they would do is they would come all the way, they would make their individual journeys to America, uh, settle down there without their families, and yet still for a country in which they were not wanted, they were not seen as desirable immigrants. Both of them still rose to the call of duty and fought for our nation and fought, um, to help preserve the nation that they left from the Japanese invasion during World War II, and put their lives on the line, even when at this time frame, it was not often allowed for you to become naturalized as a Chinese person. So if you were born in America, you could be a birthright citizen, but oftentimes you could not become a citizen through the naturalization process. And many soldiers, Chinese soldiers, and other Asian soldiers in World War One, for instance, uh, served and were denied citizenship as part of their service. They were rewarded with kind of fuck all, essentially. And um, despite that, despite knowing that, they still went to protect their old homeland and their new one. So I think that's just a really cool part of my family history. My granddad worked with the Flying Tigers, which is really cool. If anyone's never seen the Flying Tigers, just Google Flying Tigers. It is an Air Force. It is the U.S. Air Force and the Pacific Theater, as well as the initial volunteer group that went over before we technically joined the war against Japan. That went over to protect China. And yeah, so that's kind of an interesting part for me. Uh, if I can sort of volley it back to you, what is an
uh,
interesting part of your family history that you uncovered through oral histories, through research?
Having discussions with my mom, my grandfather on my dad's side was apparently this world class woodworker, and he
Whoa.
crafted a wooden sink for some kind of competition for Mao and was
Oh,
given an
okay.
award for it, but the
Hell
award
yeah.
had to be like given back or something. Like they like recycled the reward, the
Sure,
medal
they had
or
to
the trophy.
redistribute the reward
Yeah,
to
yeah.
everyone. Yeah.
I don't know how true that is, but he was a woodworker. Now it makes kind of all sorts of sense of how many woodworking tools he had in his room, just in a bucket at the end of his bed, in in his tiny Chinatown apartment. Um, I don't know. There's the whole thing with my grandfather. I never really had a relationship with him. The one on my dad's side, anyway. He was
Sure.
sort of yeah. He was sort of a uh, contentious figure in my family.
Mm,
He was. I think I mentioned this on Discord before. He was like adopted into another family. Um, he wasn't a Lee. He was adopted into a Lee family that didn't have any sons, but they wanted a son so they can pass on their family legacy. So like
sure.
beyond my grandfather, like I don't know where that leads. It's just we don't know who he was or we other than who he was, where he came from, what his parents were like, and that's just gone. Then he had like a second family that we don't talk about in my family.
Oh, sure.
Yeah,
Sure.
it's a whole thing. But I don't know if there was some kind of record of this beautiful sink that he that he so supposedly crafted out of wood. I want to see this sink. I want to see how like
Sure. Sure.
what's the deal with this sink?
Yeah. Is this like a sink that was in like Mao's house? Like where did it go?
I have no idea. Yeah, a
That's
lot of
incredible.
yeah, just these stories. Who knows if it's actually true? Maybe he was just like boasting or something.
Well, I think that concludes our podcast episode. Sean, thank you so much for joining me. And listen, for those who are interested in doing family history and genealogy, the hardest part of the journey is that first step is just getting into it. And once you get into it, you will realize uh, how much there is out there that you could research, that you can find out. Um, and it goes from anything from scrolling through immigration records to reading history books, so that you understand the context that they lived in. It doesn't all have to be concrete details. Sometimes it's just family stories as well.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just creating a sink.
Can get a voice recorder, because oral histories, if people stop telling them, then they just go away. Have something at least digitized or transcribed, if you can. Um, yeah,
Yeah. A story untold is a story unheard. And, here at Asians Rep, we're all about the stories. Speaking of Asians Represent, we could not do this without our beloved patrons. So thank you very much to our patrons, in specific, our best patrons, because we have a ranking. Metal Weave Games, Valor's Games, Michelle, and Most Honorable, and Epic Impulse, among so many others. But thank you so much for supporting the show. You are what allow us to do what we do, and you are what allow us to tell these stories and have some fun and hopefully help some folks in their own journeys. Thank you.
Well, thank you for having me on. This was really fun. Uh, I would like to update everyone on what other stories I can find, because there's so many people I can talk to. I want to know how my aunt came to America the first time around.
Listen, if you want to see another episode like this where we go maybe a little bit more in depth on our family histories and genealogies and things like that, just hey, go to our Discord, go to show discussions, and let us know. All right, everyone, have a great rest of your day, and stay frosty.
Bye.
Bye.